5 days. That's how long Zara Thompson had been hiding fractured cheekbones, bruised kidneys, and psychological trauma so deep she'd stopped recognizing her own reflection in the mirror each morning. 5 days after Marcus Chen, her boyfriend of 8 months, senior trader, member of Seattle's elite Chen family, had slammed her head against their kitchen counter because she'd suggested couples therapy. 5 days later, he'd wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed until her vision tunneled, all while whispering that she was ungrateful for questioning a man who loved her enough to tolerate her ambition. 5 days of layering concealer over yellowing bruises, choosing high-necked blouses to hide finger-shaped marks, and swallowing prescription painkillers with morning coffee just to make it through presentations without her hands shaking. Because Zara Thompson hadn't clawed her way from a Detroit public housing project to Seattle's financial elite by showing weakness, hadn't earned her MBA on full scholarship, while working 3 jobs by letting anyone see her break. And she sure as hell wasn't going to let Marcus Chen, mediocre trader riding his family's connections, destroy the career she'd built from nothing. So when Phoenix Global Holdings scheduled their Q3 investor presentation for Thursday at 2 p.m. in the 40th floor conference room, Zara showed up. Put on her armor, the Armani suit she'd saved 6 months to afford, the Louboutins that made her tower at 5'9", the diamond studs that had been her grandmother's only valuable possession. She painted her face until the bruises disappeared. She straightened her natural hair into the sleek ponytail the board preferred. She became the version of Zara Thompson that white investors trusted with their money. And she walked into that glass-walled conference room like she owned it. 40 people filled the space. Investors in expensive suits, Phoenix Global executives, department heads, and at the head of the table, Kang Ji-hoon. The CEO was a study in contradictions. 38 years old, Korean American, 6'2" of controlled power in a custom Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Zara's annual rent. His black hair was styled with precision, his face all sharp angles and harder eyes. But what everyone noticed, what everyone whispered about in break rooms and after-hours bars, were the tattoos. Traditional Korean designs that started at his collar and disappeared beneath expensive fabric. Dragons and tigers and Hanja characters that spoke of violence, survived, and power claimed. He moved like a predator, pretending to be domesticated, and his reputation made grown men check exit routes when he entered a room. The Ice Dragon of the Pacific Northwest, they called him. The CEO who'd taken control of Phoenix Global 3 years ago after his father's mysterious death, and transformed it from struggling logistics company into a financial empire. The man everyone knew ran more than just legitimate business, but nobody dared question. Zara had been at Phoenix Global for 11 months. In that time, she'd seen Kang Ji-hoon exactly 17 times, always from a distance, always in settings where she kept her eyes down and her mouth shut. Because women who looked too long at powerful men got noticed, and being noticed was dangerous. But she'd felt him watching her. More than once, she'd turned from her desk to find his dark eyes fixed on her through glass walls before he'd looked away, expression unreadable. Now, standing at the head of the conference table with her presentation pulled up on massive screens, Zara forced herself to breathe through the pain radiating from her fractured ribs. The PowerPoint was flawless. She'd worked until 3 a.m. perfecting it, ignoring Marcus's texts demanding she come home, answer him, stop being a selfish bitch who cared more about spreadsheets than her relationship. Q3 earnings exceeded projections by 18%, Zara began, her voice steady despite the agony. Our strategic reallocation of assets in the Asian markets proved highly effective, and our risk assessment models successfully predicted. Miss Thompson, an older white investor, Johnson, she thought his name was, interrupted. These numbers seem almost too good. How do we know your models aren't masking underlying volatility? It was a challenge. A test. The kind of aggressive questioning that separated competent analysts from exceptional ones. Zara met his eyes. Because I don't mask volatility, Mr. Johnson. I quantify it. If you'll direct your attention to slide 12, you'll see the Monte Carlo simulations I ran across 10,000 iterations. The volatility is there. We're just positioned to profit from it rather than be destroyed by it. Johnson's expression shifted from skeptical to impressed. Other investors nodded, scribbling notes. Zara continued for another 20 minutes, fielding questions with the brilliant precision she was known for. Every challenge met with data. Every doubt is crushed with evidence. This was her element. The one place where being smarter than everyone else was an asset instead of a threat. She was explaining the implications of their Q4 strategy when her vision started to blur at the edges. No. Not now. Not here. Zara gripped the edge of the table, forcing herself to focus. Just 10 more minutes. Just finish the presentation. The room tilted. Her legs turned to water. The pain that she'd been holding back with sheer willpower suddenly roared through every nerve, and Zara felt herself falling forward, the marble floor rushing up to meet her. This is it, she thought with strange clarity. I'm going to die in front of 40 people who'll remember me as the analyst who couldn't handle the pressure. But the floor never came. Instead, iron-strong arms caught her mid-collapse. hands that were surprisingly gentle, lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against a chest that smelled of expensive cologne and something darker, smoke and steel and danger. Zara's eyes fluttered open to find herself staring up at Kang Ji-hoon's face. Up close, she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the way his expression shifted from shock to something that looked almost like recognition. "Clear this room." His voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. Accented English turned into absolute command. "Now. Everyone out." "Sir, should we call an ambulance?" someone started. I said now. Ji-hoon's arms tightened around Zara, protective. "Get Dr. Yeon. Tell him to meet me in my office immediately." 40 people scrambled for the exits, executives and investors alike obeying without question. Because when the ice dragon gave an order, you didn't ask why. As consciousness started to fade again, Zara heard Ji-hoon's voice close to her ear, switching to rapid Korean on his phone. Then, in English, softer than she'd ever heard him speak, "I've got you. You're safe now." And then, as darkness pulled her under, "Someone find out everything about Marcus Chen. Everything. I want his entire life documented, before I decide how he dies." The last thing Zara registered before unconsciousness claimed her was the feeling of being carried. Not like a victim, but like something precious that someone was willing to go to war to protect. She'd spent 5 days hiding, but the ice dragon had seen her anyway. And in Seattle's dangerous underworld, being seen by Kang Ji-hoon meant everything was about to change. Chapter 1. Ji-hoon's private office occupied the entire 45th floor of Phoenix Global Holdings. Zara had never been up here. Few people had. It was legendary within the company, whispered about in break rooms. The ice dragon's lair, where fortunes were made and careers ended with a single word. She regained consciousness on a leather sofa that probably cost more than her car, her body screaming in protest as awareness returned. The room swam into focus. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline, minimalist furniture that spoke of wealth without ostentation, and a desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. Ji-hoon stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean. Even from behind, he radiated controlled fury, shoulders tight beneath expensive fabric, one hand clenched into a fist at his side. Zara tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her ribs, and she couldn't suppress the gasp that escaped. Ji-hoon turned immediately, ending his call mid-sentence. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and Zara found herself staring up at the most dangerous man in Seattle, with nowhere to hide. "Don't move," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "Dr. Yoon is on his way." "I'm fine," Zara managed, the lie automatic. "I just need—" "You collapsed in the middle of a presentation, after displaying symptoms I've been watching worsen for 5 days. Ji-hoon's dark eyes pinned her in place. "You are many things, Miss Thompson, but fine is not one of them." The use of her name, not her title, not some generic address, but her actual name spoken with a precision that suggested he'd been saying it to himself for a while, sent a shiver down her spine. "How long have you been watching me?" The question came out before she could stop it. Something flickered in Ji-hoon's expression. "Longer than you know, but right now, that's not what matters." He pulled a chair close to the sofa, sitting so they were at eye level. "What matters is that you tell me who did this to you." Zara's throat closed. The practiced denials she'd been using for 5 days, the excuses she'd given coworkers who'd noticed her wincing, the lies she'd told herself each morning, all of them died on her tongue under the weight of Ji-hoon's gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. "Yes, you do." Ji-hoon leaned forward, and Zara caught the scent of him again, expensive cologne underlaid with something that reminded her of cold steel. "I know what abuse looks like, Zara. I watched my father nearly kill my mother for 16 years. I learned to read the signs before I was old enough to understand what I was seeing." The rawness in his voice cracked something inside her chest. "The way you've been moving this week," he continued, relentless, "favoring your left side, the makeup that's slightly too heavy on one cheekbone, the high-necked blouses when you usually prefer open collars, the painkillers I've seen you take every 2 hours." He paused, and the fear in your eyes whenever your phone buzzes. Zara felt tears burning, fought them back. "You're my CEO. This is inappropriate. I'm also the man who just caught you when you fell." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. "And right now I'm choosing to be the latter. So I'm gonna ask you one more time, and I need you to trust me enough to tell the truth. Who did this to you?" The word trust hung between them like a challenge. Zara had stopped trusting people 8 months ago, when Marcus had convinced her that love looked like control, that jealousy was proof of devotion, that isolation was protection. But something in Ji-hoon's eyes, something that looked like genuine anguish, mixed with barely controlled rage, made her want to believe him. "Marcus Chen," she heard herself say. "My boyfriend, senior trader in the derivatives division." Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched on the chair arms hard enough that she heard the leather creak. "How long?" 8 months together. The violence started 3 months ago. Small things at first. Shoving, grabbing too hard, punching walls near my head. Zara's voice sounded detached, clinical, like she was describing someone else's life. It escalated 2 weeks ago when I suggested therapy. Last week I told him I was thinking about leaving. And 5 days ago, the memory crashed over her. Marcus's face twisted with rage, his hands around her throat, the kitchen counter slamming into her cheekbone, his voice hissing that she was nothing without him, that she should be grateful he tolerated her career. 5 days ago, he taught me a lesson about disrespecting him by questioning our relationship. The words tasted like bile. He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd destroy my career. His family has connections everywhere. The Chens. I know who the Chens are. Ji-hoon's voice had gone quiet. Dangerous. I know exactly how much power they think they have. He stood, pulled out his phone, and made a call. When he spoke, it was in Korean again, but Zara caught enough to make her blood run cold. Names, locations, instructions that sounded like military operations. Then he switched to English, his eyes never leaving hers. Song, I need you to locate Marcus Chen, senior trader, derivatives division. I want him found within the hour. A pause, while someone on the other end responded. I don't care if he's in a meeting. I don't care if he's with clients. I don't care if he's sitting in the governor's office. Ji-hoon's tone could have frozen steel. Bring him to the pier, 47 warehouse. And Song, make absolutely certain he understands this isn't optional. He ended the call and sat back down, his attention returning to Zara with an intensity that should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Safe. What are you going to do? She asked, though part of her already knew. I'm going to make sure Marcus Chen never touches you again. Ji-hoon's expression was absolute. I'm going to ensure he understands exactly what happens to men who hurt women in my city. And then I'm going to dismantle every protection his family thinks they can hide behind. You can't. The Chens will retaliate. They'll come after Phoenix Global. After you. Let them try. The smile Ji-hoon gave her was colder than anything she'd ever seen. I've been looking for an excuse to have a conversation with the Chen family about their business practices. They've been operating under the assumption that old money and political connections make them untouchable. He leaned closer. They're about to learn that in Seattle, there's only one person who decides who's untouchable. And it's not them. Zara should have been horrified. Should have protested, insisted on legal channels, reminded him that vigilante justice was still violence. But she'd tried the legal route. She'd documented everything. She'd tried to leave. And Marcus had made it clear that the systems designed to protect women like her would fail, because men like him had spent generations ensuring they would. What happens to me? She whispered. You stay here until you're healed. Ji-hoon's voice gentled slightly. I'm having your things brought from your apartment. You'll have a private suite, medical care, security. You don't go back to work until you're ready. You don't see Marcus again, unless you choose to testify against him in court. Why are you doing this? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the Ice Dragon's facade cracked, and Zara saw something raw underneath. Because 11 months ago, you walked into this building, and within 6 weeks, you identified corruption my CFO had been hiding for years. You didn't back down when he tried to intimidate you. You didn't compromise when he offered you money to bury the report. You stood in front of the board and called his risk assessment mathematically illiterate fantasy. Ji-hoon's expression softened. You were the bravest person I'd ever seen. And I've been watching you ever since, waiting for the right moment to tell you that. Zara's breath caught. You've been watching me for almost a year. Yes, that's obsessive, inappropriate, crossing every professional boundary. Ji-hoon didn't look away. All of the above. But I don't regret it, because it meant I noticed when something was wrong this week. It meant I was there to catch you today. Before Zara could respond, there was a knock on the door. An older Korean man entered carrying a medical bag. Drive. Yeon. Presumably. Ji-hoon stood. I'll give you privacy for the examination. But Zara? He waited until she met his eyes. Whatever Dr. Yeon finds, whatever evidence there is, we're documenting everything. Not just for what I'm going to do to Marcus Chen. For what you're going to do when you're ready to press charges. Then he walked out, leaving Zara alone with the doctor, and the terrifying realization that her carefully controlled life had just been completely upended by the most dangerous man in Seattle. And the most terrifying part? She trusted him. Chapter 2. Dr. Yeon's examination was thorough and clinical. He documented everything. The fractured cheekbone, 3 cracked ribs, severe bruising across her torso and kidneys, the ligature marks on her throat that spoke of strangulation. Each injury was photographed, measured, entered into a medical record that would stand up in any courtroom. When he finished, the doctor looked at Zara with professional sympathy. You're lucky to be alive, Miss Thompson. Another few pounds of pressure on your throat, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Lucky. The word felt hollow. After Dr. Yoon left with instructions for pain management and strict bed rest, Zara was alone in Ji-hoon's office for 3 hours. She dozed fitfully on the leather sofa, waking periodically to the sound of muted phone calls in Korean from the adjacent room and the Seattle skyline darkening beyond the windows. At 10:47 p.m., Ji-hoon returned. His tie was gone. His shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the traditional tattoos that covered his forearms, dragons and tigers rendered in black ink, beautiful and violent. There was blood on his knuckles. Zara sat up carefully, ignoring the protest from her ribs. Is he dead? No. Ji-hoon walked to the bar, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, then seemed to think better of it, and poured a second glass. He brought one to Zara. He's alive, conscious, and in custody, at Harborview Medical Center under guard. Broken jaw, fractured orbital bone, 3 broken ribs, shattered kneecap, and various other injuries that will heal, but remind him every day of what happens when you put your hands on someone who matters to me. The casual way he said, someone who matters to me, made Zara's chest tighten. You went yourself, she said. Not a question. I don't delegate personal business. Ji-hoon took a drink, his dark eyes never leaving hers. Marcus Chen needed to understand that this wasn't corporate punishment or legal consequences. This was about what he did to you specifically. That required my personal attention. Zara should have been horrified. The civilized part of her, the part that believed in law and order and appropriate channels, wanted to be horrified. But the part that had spent 5 days hiding injuries, that had been choked until her vision darkened, that had been told she was worthless by a man who claimed to love her, that part felt nothing but savage satisfaction. What did you say to him? She asked. Ji-hoon's expression went cold. I told him that he had 2 choices. Option 1, cooperate fully with the criminal investigation I've already initiated, plead guilty to assault and battery, accept whatever prison sentence the prosecutor recommends, and spend the rest of his life knowing that if he ever speaks your name again, I'll finish what I started tonight. And option 2? Option 2 was less civilized. Ji-hoon finished his whiskey. He chose option 1. Before Zara could respond, Ji-hoon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something predatory flickered across his face. And that would be confirmation that Phase 2 is complete. Phase 2? While I was having my conversation with Marcus at Pier 47, my financial team was conducting an audit of his trading accounts. Ji-hoon pulled up something on his phone, then handed it to Zara. Look familiar. Zara stared at the screen. Her proprietary financial models, the sophisticated risk assessment algorithms she'd developed over months of work, were displayed in trading records under Marcus Chen's name. Dates and timestamps proved he'd been using them for weeks, generating millions in profits that he'd claimed as his own genius. He stole my work, Zara breathed. He was taking credit for my analysis while abusing you into silence. Yes. Ji-hoon's voice was hard. He also embezzled $2.3 million through fraudulent derivative trades, using accounts he thought were untraceable. They weren't. My people found everything within 3 hours. Zara looked up at him. You had his entire financial life audited in 3 hours? I have very efficient people. Ji-hoon took his phone back. The evidence has been forwarded to the SEC, the FBI's white-collar crime division, and the Washington State Attorney General. Marcus Chen's trading license has been permanently revoked. His accounts are frozen. And every firm he tried to sell your work to has been notified that they were purchasing stolen intellectual property. The Chens will protect him, Zara said. But even as she spoke, she could see Ji-hoon's expression and knew she was wrong. The Chens made their money in real estate and political influence. They have no tolerance for the kind of public scandal that comes with federal embezzlement charges. Ji-hoon sat on the edge of his desk. I had a very illuminating phone call with Marcus's father an hour ago. When I explained that his son had not only committed federal crimes, but had done so while systematically abusing a woman under my protection, he made a choice. What choice? To cut Marcus loose entirely. Public statement disowning him, removal from family trusts, termination of all legal support. Ji-hoon's smile was sharp. Turns out even old Seattle money understands that some battles aren't worth fighting. Especially when fighting them means going to war with me. Zara felt dizzy, and not from her injuries. In 8 hours, Ji-hoon had dismantled Marcus's entire existence. Physical retribution, criminal exposure, professional destruction, and familial abandonment. It was methodical, brutal, and absolutely thorough. His aunt in HR, she started. Linda Park was terminated at 6 p.m. for gross negligence and complicity in covering up workplace harassment. I've reviewed her case files personally. She dismissed 17 complaints over 5 years, all from women reporting men with family connections. Ji-hoon's expression darkened. 17 women who were told their complaints would damage their careers. 17 women who were silenced by a system designed to protect predators. What happens to them? I've hired an outside firm to contact each woman privately. They'll be offered the opportunity to file formal complaints with full legal support. financial compensation, and employment protection. The ones still working here will have their careers fast-tracked as restitution. The ones who left will be offered positions if they want them. Zara stared at him. You're restructuring the entire HR department because of what happened to me. I'm restructuring it because it should have been restructured years ago. Ji-hoon stood, moved to the windows overlooking Seattle's glittering skyline. My father built a corporate culture that protected men like Marcus Chen. He believed broken women were easier to control, that they asked fewer questions about where the money came from. I've spent 3 years trying to reform that legacy incrementally, thinking I could slowly change things without burning the whole system down. He turned back to face her. You collapsing today taught me that incremental reform is just another way of enabling continued abuse. So yes, I'm restructuring everything. New HR director from outside the company. Anonymous reporting system with external investigators. Mandatory anti-harassment training conducted by actual survivors, not lawyers reading from scripts. And a policy that makes it absolutely clear. Anyone who hurts someone at Phoenix Global will face consequences that make Marcus Chen's fate look merciful. Zara's throat tightened. Why? Why go this far for me? Ji-hoon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because 11 months ago you walked into my building, and within weeks you proved you were the bravest, most brilliant person I'd ever met. Because I've been watching you survive in a system designed to break women like you, and you kept fighting anyway. Because when you collapsed today, I caught you. And the thought of anyone laying hands on you made me feel something I haven't felt since I was 16 years old watching my father hurt my mother. What feeling? The certainty that I would kill to protect someone. His dark eyes met hers. I didn't kill Marcus because you deserve justice, not just revenge. But I made sure he understood that the only reason he's breathing is because you're going to testify against him in court and watch him go to prison legally. That's your choice to make, not mine. Zara stood carefully, walked to where Ji-hoon stood by the windows. Up close, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the blood he hadn't quite washed off his knuckles, the way his hands clenched as if fighting the urge to reach for her. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Ji-hoon's expression was unreadable. What I did tonight. The violence, the intimidation, the systematic destruction of a man's entire life. That's who I am. That's what I'm capable of. And you need to understand that before you decide whether you can accept my protection or if you need to walk away from it. Zara looked at the blood on his knuckles, thought about Marcus's screams in some warehouse at Pier 47, considered the brutal efficiency with which Ji-hoon had torn apart a man's existence in less time than it took most people to finish a workday. She should have been terrified. She should have demanded to leave, should have run from this dangerous man who'd just proven exactly how far he'd go. Instead, she reached out and took his blood-stained hand in hers. I'm not walking away, she said quietly. Not yet. Chapter 3. Ji-hoon's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay. Zara had been there for 6 days, recovering in a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, and she still hadn't seen all of it. The space was a study in contrasts. Minimalist modern design mixed with traditional Korean elements. Sleek furniture alongside antique screens. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Puget Sound beside walls displaying calligraphy that Zara couldn't read but found beautiful. It felt like Ji-hoon himself, caught between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither. Dr. Yeon visited daily, monitoring her healing ribs and checking for complications. A physical therapist came every afternoon to guide gentle exercises. Ji-hoon had arranged for her things to be collected from the apartment she'd shared with Marcus, though he'd sent 3 of his security team to do it, refusing to let her anywhere near that space. You don't go back to places that hurt you, he'd said simply. Not until you're strong enough that they can't hurt you anymore. Ji-hoon himself was rarely there. He left early for the office, returned late with takeout from restaurants Zara couldn't afford, then disappeared into his home office for hours of phone calls in Korean. But he always checked on her before bed. A brief knock, a quiet, "Do you need anything?" and then he was gone. It was driving her insane. On the 7th night, Zara found him on the penthouse balcony at 11 p.m., staring out at the city lights reflected on dark water. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, rolled his sleeves up to reveal the tattoos that fascinated her, traditional designs that told a story she didn't yet know how to read. Can't sleep? He asked without turning around. Can't stop thinking. Zara moved to stand beside him, careful of her still healing ribs. You've given me everything. Safety, medical care, a place to recover. But you won't tell me why. I told you why. You matter to me. That's not an answer. Zara's patience, already worn thin by a week of enforced rest and unanswered questions, finally snapped. You said you've been watching me for 11 months. You knew my work, my patterns, things about me, that my own colleagues don't notice. So stop being cryptic and tell me the truth. Why were you watching me in the first place? Ji-hoon was quiet for so long, Zara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with something that might have been regret. Do you remember your first major project at Phoenix Global? The shipping division analysis? Of course, I identified inefficiencies in the supply chain that were costing millions. Zara's mind raced back, and I found irregularities in the accounting, patterns that suggested money laundering. Ji-hoon finished. Sophisticated, carefully hidden, running through shell companies in 3 countries. You found my father's legacy. Zara's breath caught. Your father? Kang Dae-young built Phoenix Global on 2 foundations: legitimate logistics and very illegal money movement. Ji-hoon's voice was emotionless, clinical. When he died 3 years ago, I inherited both: the company, the criminal operations, and the choice of what to do with them. You could have shut it down. Not without creating a power vacuum that would be filled by someone worse. Not without losing control of assets that keep competitors from moving into Seattle. Not without destroying legitimate jobs and operations. He turned to face her finally. So I made a different choice. Slow reformation. Gradually shifting operations legitimate, quietly closing criminal pipelines, trying to transform my father's empire into something that wouldn't make me hate myself. Zara processed this, her analytical mind already seeing the implications. My report threatened that. Your report would have exposed operations I was actively trying to dismantle, but hadn't quite eliminated yet. It would have brought federal investigation, destroyed the company, put thousands of legitimate employees out of work, and handed Seattle's underworld to the Bratva, who'd been waiting for an opening. So you should have buried it. Destroyed my career, made me disappear. Zara's voice was steady, despite her racing heart. That's what a smart crime boss would do. Ji-hoon's smile was bitter. That's what my father would have done. But I looked at your analysis. Brilliant, thorough, devastating. And I saw someone brave enough to burn down corruption even when it could destroy her career. Someone who gave a damn about doing the right thing. He moved closer, and Zara could smell his cologne mixed with the salt air from the bay. So I made another choice, he continued. I let your report go through. Let you expose those operations. Used your evidence to justify shutting them down permanently. And I told my people that Zara Thompson was untouchable, that anyone who tried to sabotage her career or retaliate against her would answer to me personally. Zara's mind raced. The CFO who tried to bury my report, he resigned 2 weeks later. He was given a choice: resign or face prosecution for the embezzlement I'd suddenly discovered in his accounts. Ji-hoon's expression was unreadable. Amazing how much evidence appears when you start actually looking. The senior analyst who kept accidentally deleting my files transferred to our Anchorage office permanently. My bonus last year was triple what I expected. Because you'd earned it, and I wasn't going to let mediocre men steal credit for your work. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. I've been watching you for 11 months, Zara. Watching you survive in a system designed to break brilliant women. Watching you fight every day while men with half your intelligence tried to diminish you. And I kept you safe the only way I knew how. From a distance, in the shadows, making sure nothing touched you. Until Marcus. The name hung between them like a blade. Until Marcus, Ji-hoon agreed, his voice rough. I didn't know about him until it was too late. You kept that private, and I respected your boundaries enough not to invade your personal life. By the time I noticed something was wrong, the changes in your behavior, the fear I saw when your phone buzzed, you were already hurt. You turned back to the railing, hands gripping the metal hard enough that his knuckles went white. Do you know what it felt like, watching you present at that meeting? Seeing you in pain, but fighting through it? Because you're too strong to show weakness? And then watching you fall, knowing that someone had hurt you badly enough that your body gave up? His voice cracked slightly. I caught you, but I was 11 months too late to prevent you from falling in the first place. Zara stared at his profile. This dangerous man who'd just confessed to a year of obsessive protection, who'd used her work to dismantle his own father's criminal empire, who blamed himself for not somehow preventing abuse he couldn't have known about. You said you were waiting for the right moment to reveal yourself, she said quietly. What moment were you waiting for? Ji-hoon looked at her then, and the raw emotion in his dark eyes took her breath away. The moment when I'd transformed enough of my father's empire that I could offer you something other than darkness. When I could come to you not as a crime boss trying to recruit his enemy, but as a man who'd done the hard work of becoming someone worthy of a woman like you. He laughed bitterly. I had a whole plan. Another year of legitimizing operations. Complete separation from criminal activities. Then I was going to ask you to dinner, like a normal person. What changed? You collapsed into my arms, and I realized I'd been a coward. Ji-hoon's voice dropped. I'd been so focused on becoming worthy that I missed what was happening right in front of me. You needed protection, and I gave you distance. You needed someone to see your suffering, and I pretended professional boundaries mattered more than your safety. So you're not a coward anymore? No. His eyes held hers. I'm a man who caught you when you fell and decided that I'm done hiding. Done waiting. Done pretending I don't care about you more than I care about appearing respectable. Zara's heart hammered against her healing ribs. She should leave, should thank him for his protection, and walk away from this man who just admitted to 11 months of observation, criminal operations, and an obsession with her that crossed every professional line. Instead, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind for days. Are you still in love with me? Or was that just something you said to justify watching me? Ji-hoon moved so fast she barely registered it, closing the distance between them, his hands gentle on her face, careful of her injuries even as intensity blazed in his eyes. I have been in love with you since the day you called my CFO's work mathematically illiterate fantasy in front of the entire board. Since you refused his bribe to bury your findings. Since you chose integrity over safety, even when it could have destroyed you. His thumb traced her cheekbone, avoiding the fading bruise. And I will love you whether you choose to stay or walk away. That's not negotiable. That's just fact. You can't just declare feelings as facts. Watch me. Ji-hoon smiled, and it transformed his face from ice to warmth. I love you, Zara Thompson. Completely. Obsessively. In ways that probably aren't healthy or appropriate. And I'm done pretending otherwise. Zara stared up at the most dangerous man in Seattle, and made a choice that would change everything. Okay. I'm staying. Not just to heal. She reached up, touched the tattoos on his forearm. I'm staying to figure out what this is. What we could be, if I can trust you the way you've been protecting me. Ji-hoon's smile was devastating. That's all I'm asking. He kissed her forehead, gentle, despite the hunger she saw in his eyes, and Zara realized she'd just agreed to fall in love with a monster who was trying to become a man. She should have been terrified. She wasn't. Chapter 4. 3 weeks into her recovery, Zara woke at 2 a.m. to find Ji-hoon's side of the bed empty. They'd been sharing his room for 5 days now, a gradual progression from separate suites to her falling asleep on his couch during late-night conversations, to waking up in his arms with neither of them quite sure how they'd gotten there. She found him in his study, sitting in darkness with a tumbler of whiskey and old photographs spread across his desk. Can't sleep? Zara asked from the doorway. Ji-hoon looked up, and even in the dim light she could see the haunted expression on his face. Come here. There's something I need to show you. Zara crossed to the desk, her ribs barely protesting anymore. The photographs were old, some faded with age. A beautiful Korean woman with sad eyes. A young boy who looked like Ji-hoon. And a man whose face made Zara's skin crawl even in a decades-old picture. Handsome but cruel. Eyes that promised violence. My father, Ji-hoon said, tapping the man's image. Kang Dae-young. Built Phoenix Global from nothing, turned it into an empire, and destroyed everyone who loved him in the process. He picked up a photo of the woman, younger, smiling, before the sadness had settled into permanent lines around her eyes. My mother, Min Seo, 23 when she married him. 39 when she finally left. 16 years of systematic destruction, disguised as marriage. Zara sat in the chair across from him, waiting. I was 7 the first time I watched him beat her, Ji-hoon continued, his voice flat. She'd questioned a business decision at dinner, something minor, respectful. He backhanded her across the face hard enough to split her lip. Then he looked at me and said, women need to be reminded of their place. Remember that. His hands clenched around the whiskey glass. It got worse as I got older. The beatings became more frequent, more brutal. She'd wear long sleeves in summer to hide the bruises, makeup that never quite covered the damage. And she'd smile at me like nothing was wrong, like this was just how marriage worked. Why didn't she leave? Zara asked softly. Because he told her the same thing Marcus told you, that no one would believe her, that he had too much power, that leaving would destroy her and everyone she loved. Ji-hoon took a drink. He also told her that if she left, he'd make sure she never saw me again. And she believed him. Because he'd already proven he could make people disappear. Zara felt ice spreading through her chest. What do you mean, disappear? My father didn't just run money laundering operations. He built a corporate culture, specifically designed to enable abusers. Ji-hoon pulled out a different folder, newer, filled with documents. After he died, I found his private files, personnel records, hiring criteria, a systematic pattern of recruiting men with histories of violence against women. He spread the documents across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. He believed broken women were easier to control, that women dealing with trauma didn't ask questions about suspicious financial transactions, that fear was a management tool. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. He literally built a company culture where abuse was protected because it served his criminal operations. Zara stared at the files, her analytical mind already seeing the pattern. Linda Park in HR, Marcus's aunt, was hired personally by my father, along with 3 other HR managers whose sole job was to dismiss complaints, protect connected men, and ensure that women who reported abuse faced retaliation rather than justice. Ji-hoon's voice was bitter. 17 documented cases over 5 years. 17 women who were told their careers would be destroyed if they kept complaining. And those are just the ones who bothered to report at all. That's systematic. That's evil. Yes, Ji-hoon met her eyes. My father was a monster, who understood that broken women, asking fewer questions about illegal money moving through the company. So he made sure women kept getting broken. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves against the shore below. When did your mother finally leave? Zara asked. When I was 16. He'd beaten her unconscious during an argument about my college plans. I found her in the kitchen, blood pooling on the marble floor. Ji-hoon's hands shook slightly. I called an ambulance. When she woke up in the hospital, I told her that if she went back to him, I'd never forgive her. That I'd rather have a mother who left than watch her die by degrees. And she listened. She left the next day, took nothing but her clothes and me, filed for divorce, fought him for 2 years in court, and finally got free when he made the mistake of threatening her lawyer on a recorded line. Ji-hoon smiled without humor. She lives in Vancouver now. Remarried to a kind man, who teaches literature. She's happy. Finally. And your father? Ji-hoon was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried something dark and final. 3 years ago, my father died in a car accident. Brake failure on a mountain road. Very tragic. Very convenient timing. Exactly 1 week after I'd discovered the extent of his criminal operations and 2 days after he'd threatened to destroy my mother's new life if I didn't fall in line. Zara's breath caught. Ji-hoon, I'm not going to tell you I killed him. He met her eyes. But I'm not going to tell you I didn't. What I will tell you is that when the police called to inform me of his death, I felt nothing but relief. And when I inherited Phoenix Global, I made myself a promise. What promise? That I would dismantle everything he built that enabled abuse. That I would transform this company into something that protected women instead of breaking them. That I would be nothing like him. Ji-hoon's voice cracked. But I failed, Zara. Because I was trying to do it slowly, carefully, protecting my power base and maintaining control. And while I was being cautious, women like you were being hurt by systems he put in place. He stood, paced to the window overlooking Elliott Bay. Marcus Chen was hired 4 years ago, during my father's final year. Do you know why he got the job despite mediocre credentials? Because his uncle told my father that Marcus, quote, knew how to keep women in line. That was literally in his hiring recommendation, treating violence against women as a job qualification. Zara felt sick, and the HR complaint I filed went to Linda Park, who was doing exactly what my father had trained her to do. Protect the abuser, silence the victim, maintain the system. Ji-hoon turned back to her. When you collapsed into my arms, I didn't just see you falling. I saw my mother on that kitchen floor. I saw every woman my father's system had broken. And I realized that trying to reform it incrementally was just another way of being complicit. So what changed? Everything. Ji-hoon returned to the desk, gathered the photographs and files. The same day I destroyed Marcus Chen's life, I commissioned a complete audit of every harassment complaint filed in the last 10 years. Every dismissal, every resolution, every woman who was told to drop it. And what I found proved that half measures don't work. He pulled out a new folder. This one thick with documentation. 43 complaints, over 10 years. 43 women told their concerns would damage their careers. 31 of those women left the company within 6 months of reporting. 8 were promoted into positions that isolated them from their harassers, but also from advancement opportunities. 4 received settlements with NDAs. 0 harassers faced meaningful consequences. Zara looked at the numbers with professional horror. That's not a broken system. That's a system working exactly as designed. Yes, designed by my father to protect his operations, by protecting abusers. Ji-hoon's expression was granite. So I'm burning it all down. New HR leadership from outside the company. Anonymous reporting with external investigators, who have no loyalty to Phoenix Global, or the families connected to it. Mandatory training conducted by actual survivors. And a policy that makes it crystal clear. The next man who hurts a woman at this company will face criminal prosecution, civil liability, and personal retribution from me. That's gonna make you enemies. I already have enemies. At least these will be the right ones. He moved to stand in front of her. But I need you to understand what you're getting involved with by staying here. I'm not just fighting Marcus Chen. I'm fighting my father's entire legacy. The systems he built, the culture he fostered, the men who profited from it. And some of them have power that rivals mine. Zara stood, moved closer to him. You said your father died in convenient brake failure. I did. Are you capable of doing that again? If someone threatens me, threatens this reformation, would you kill them? Ji-hoon didn't look away. Yes, without hesitation, without regret. That's what scares you. Zara realized. Not that you're your father's son. That you could be. That the violence is still there. I watched him beat my mother for 16 years. I learned early that violence is a tool for controlling people you're supposed to love. And now I'm using violence to protect you. And I can't tell if I'm breaking the cycle or perpetuating it with better intentions. Zara took his face in her hands, made him look at her. Your father used violence to maintain control and enable abuse. You're using it to dismantle those systems and protect victims. That's not the same thing. That's not even close. How can you be sure? Because your father taught you that women need to be broken. And you're spending millions of dollars and risking your empire to prove the opposite. She held his gaze. You're not your father, Ji-hoon. You're the man his victims wish had existed. Ji-hoon closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Zara agreed. But I'm staying anyway. Chapter 5. 4 weeks into recovery, Zara stood in Ji-hoon's penthouse gym, working through the physical therapy exercises Dr. Yeon had prescribed. Her ribs had healed enough that the pain was manageable. A dull ache rather than the sharp agony that had defined her first weeks of freedom. Freedom. That word kept circling in her mind, loaded with complications she couldn't quite untangle. She was free from Marcus, free from his violence, his control, his systematic destruction of her self-worth. But was she truly free when she was living in another man's home, under another man's protection, wrapped in the safety that Ji-hoon's power provided? You're thinking too hard. Ji-hoon's voice came from the doorway. He was still in his suit from work, tie loosened, looking exhausted. Dr. Yeon said these exercises should be mindless. Dr. Yeon doesn't understand that my mind doesn't do mindless. Zara set down the resistance band she'd been using. Can I ask you something? Always. Marcus used to say he was protecting me, that his jealousy was because he loved me so much. That isolating me from my friends was keeping me safe from people who didn't understand our relationship. She met Ji-hoon's eyes. How is what you're doing different? Ji-hoon went very still. Then he crossed the room, sat on the weight bench, and gave her his complete attention. That's the right question to ask, he said quietly. And I'm glad you're asking it, instead of just accepting my version of events. So what's the answer? The answer is in the choice. Ji-hoon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Marcus told you he was protecting you, while actively isolating you from anyone who could help you escape. He made you dependent on him financially, emotionally, socially. He destroyed your support systems, and called it love. When you tried to leave, he beat you, and threatened to ruin your career. Every protection he offered came with conditions that served his control. Zara's chest tightened with the accuracy of it. What I'm offering you is different, because it comes with an exit door that's always unlocked. Ji-hoon's voice was steady. You can leave right now. Walk out of this penthouse, go back to your own life, and I will still ensure Marcus never touches you again. I'll still restructure Phoenix Global's harassment policies. I'll still make sure you're professionally protected and financially secure. The only thing that changes if you leave is that I won't be in your life romantically. That's it? No consequences? None. No retaliation. No withdrawal of protection. No punishment for choosing differently than I want you to choose. His dark eyes held hers. That's the line I will never cross. The one my father crossed every day with my mother. She couldn't leave without losing everything, including me. You can leave whenever you want and lose nothing except my presence. Zara sat beside him on the bench. But you want me to stay. Desperately. Completely. In ways that probably aren't healthy. Ji-hoon smiled without humor. But what I want doesn't override what you need. And if what you need is distance from another powerful man making decisions about your safety, then that's what you should take. You're making it sound simple. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Caring about someone enough to let them choose to leave. He reached out, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them. Can I touch you? Just your hand? The fact that he asked, that he waited for permission instead of assuming consent, made something in Zara's chest crack open. Yes. Ji-hoon took her hand gently, his scarred knuckles rough against her skin. Marcus never asked, did he? Never gave you the choice to say no. He said asking ruined the romance, that I should trust him to know what I wanted. Zara's voice was bitter. Turns out what that actually meant was that my consent didn't matter, as long as he could frame it as love. I'm going to ask you for everything, Ji-hoon said. Every touch, every kiss, every time I want to be close to you. Not because I don't know what you want, but because your consent matters more than my desire. Always. Zara looked at their joined hands. What if I said I wanted to leave right now? Pack my things and go back to my old apartment. Then I'd help you pack. Make sure the apartment is safe first. New locks, security system. Clear any trace of Marcus. I'd set up a security detail that you'd never see, but that would ensure you're protected. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. And I'd respect your decision, even though it would destroy me to watch you go. You really mean that? Test me. Say you want to leave, and watch what I do. Zara studied his face. The tension in his jaw, the vulnerability in his eyes, the way his hand trembled slightly against hers despite his controlled exterior. This was a man offering her power over him, trusting her not to weaponize it the way Marcus had weaponized every vulnerability she'd ever shown. I don't want to leave, she said quietly, but I need to know that I could. That staying is my choice, not your control disguised as protection. It will always be your choice. Ji-hoon brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. But I need you to understand what choosing to stay means. Not just the safety and the penthouse and the resources. The darkness too. What darkness? I destroyed Marcus Chen. Methodically, brutally, without mercy. And if someone else threatens you, I'll do it again. His voice was steady, unflinching. I'm trying to be a better man than my father, but I'm still capable of terrible violence when someone I love is threatened. You need to decide if you can live with that. Zara thought about Marcus's broken jaw, his shattered kneecap, the brutal retribution Ji-hoon had delivered personally. She should have been horrified. The law-abiding part of her was horrified. But the part that had been choked until her vision darkened, that had been beaten for daring to suggest therapy, that had spent 5 days hiding injuries because she was too ashamed to ask for help, that part felt only savage satisfaction. Marcus used violence to control me, she said slowly. You used violence to free me. Those aren't the same thing. They could become the same thing if I'm not careful. If I start making decisions for you, instead of with you. If I use the threat of violence to keep you compliant. Ji-hoon's expression was grave. That's why I'm giving you the choice, Zara. Not once, but constantly. Every day you stay is a new choice. Every day I have to earn your trust, instead of demanding it. What if I make the wrong choice? There's no wrong choice. Only the choice that's right for you. He stood, pulled her up with him. But I'm going to be honest about what I'm hoping for. I hope you choose to stay. I hope you choose to let me keep protecting you, while you heal. I hope eventually you choose to love me back, even knowing what I'm capable of. Zara looked up at him. This dangerous man who'd confessed to possibly killing his father, who'd destroyed her abuser without hesitation, who'd spent 11 months watching her from the shadows. The man who also asked permission to hold her hand, who offered her freedom even when it would break him, who was trying desperately to be better than the monster who raised him. I'm choosing to stay, she said. Not because I'm afraid of what happens if I leave. Not because I'm dependent on your protection. But because I want to see who we could become together, if we're both brave enough to choose each other every day. Ji-hoon's expression transformed. Relief and hope, and something deeper that looked like salvation. You're sure? I'm terrified, but I'm sure. He pulled her into his arms carefully, mindful of her still healing ribs, and Zara felt the tension drain from his body as she wrapped her arms around his waist. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for choosing to stay, when you could have run. Thank you for trusting me, when you have every reason not to. Thank you for giving me the choice, Zara responded. For understanding that real protection isn't control. That love without freedom isn't love at all. They stood like that for a long time, two broken people, choosing each other, despite the darkness, despite the trauma, despite every reason they had to keep their walls up, and their hearts locked away. Outside the windows, Seattle glittered in the evening light. Inside the penthouse, Zara Thompson made a choice that would define the rest of her life. Not to be saved, but to save herself with someone strong enough to let her. And Ji-hoon held her like she was precious, powerful, worth protecting. Not because she was fragile, but because she was choosing to be vulnerable with the one person who'd proven he'd never weaponize it. That was the difference between control and care. That was the line Marcus had crossed and Ji-hoon refused to. That was why, despite everything, Zara was choosing to stay. Chapter 6. 6 weeks after her collapse, Zara found Ji-hoon in his study at midnight, surrounded by ledgers and financial documents that she recognized immediately as the kind you didn't keep in official company records. You're still running criminal operations, she said from the doorway. Not a question. Ji-hoon looked up, no surprise in his expression. Yes. How many? Come in and I'll show you. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. You've been asking the careful questions for weeks. Time for the radical honesty. Zara sat, her heart pounding. I want to know everything. Not the sanitized version you'd tell the board. Not the half-truths you'd feed law enforcement. The actual truth about what you do, and how deep the rot goes. Ji-hoon studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that Zara could see cross his face. He pulled out 3 thick folders and spread them across the desk. My father built Phoenix Global on 3 pillars. Legitimate logistics. That's about 60% of our revenue now. Money laundering through shell companies, down to 20% from 40 when I inherited. And protection rackets targeting small businesses in Seattle's immigrant communities. That's the remaining 20%, and the thing I hate most. He opened the first folder, showing her financial flows that her analyst brain immediately recognized as illegal. The money laundering works like this. Cash-heavy businesses in Seoul, Busan, and Taipei route their profits through our shipping manifests. We invoice for freight services we never provide. They pay us in clean wire transfers. We take a 15% cut and deliver the rest to accounts in Hong Kong and Singapore. Ji-hoon's voice was clinical. It's sophisticated, hard to trace, and completely illegal. How much annually? Last year? 47 million through our systems. Year before that? 62 million. I've been reducing our participation by refusing new clients and letting existing relationships expire naturally. Naturally meaning what? Meaning I don't renew contracts when they end. I don't actively shut them down, because that creates enemies who might retaliate. I just let them fade away while offering legitimate alternatives. Ji-hoon met her eyes. It's cowardly. I know, but it's kept Seattle stable while I work on reformation. Zara absorbed this. What about the protection rackets? Ji-hoon's expression darkened. That's the ugliest part. My father believed that immigrant business owners were easy targets. Language barriers, distrust of police, fear of deportation. He built a network of, quote, security consultants who convinced shop owners in Chinatown, Little Saigon, and Koreatown that they needed protection from crimes that my father's people would commit if they didn't pay. Classic extortion. Yes, 43 businesses currently paying monthly fees, ranging from $500 to $5,000. Most of them barely profitable. All of them terrified. His jaw tightened. I've been trying to wind it down by reducing fees, providing actual security services instead of just threats. But the infrastructure is still there. The fear is still there. Why not just shut it down completely? Because nature abhors a vacuum. Ji-hoon pulled out a map showing Seattle's neighborhoods marked with different colored pins. If I completely withdraw protection, the Bratva moves in within weeks. They're already circling, waiting for weakness. And they don't offer gentle reformation. They offer brutality that makes my father look merciful. Zara studied the map, her analytical mind already seeing the patterns. You're caught between dismantling your father's empire and preventing something worse from taking its place. Exactly, and I'm terrified that by moving too slowly, I'm just perpetuating harm with better intentions. Ji-hoon stood, paced to the window. I tell myself I'm being strategic, but maybe I'm just being selfish, holding on to power because losing it means losing control. Have you killed people? Zara asked bluntly. Ji-hoon turned to face her. Yes, 3 men in the last 3 years. One was trying to kill me, self-defense. One was raping a 14-year-old girl in one of our protected businesses. And her father begged me to handle it because the police wouldn't help an undocumented family. The third was my father, if you believe the version where I arranged his brake failure. The radical honesty was almost brutal in its completeness. The girl's rapist. What happened to him? He disappeared. His body will never be found. Ji-hoon's voice was flat. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry either. Some things can't be solved with incremental reform. Zara processed this. The violence, the moral complexity, the way Ji-hoon seemed to genuinely struggle with choices that most crime bosses would make without hesitation. You're trying to be better than your father, she said slowly. But you're doing it while still maintaining the systems he built. That's why it's not working. You can't reform corruption from inside it. You have to burn it down completely. If I do that, Seattle becomes a war zone. The Bratva won't wait for permission. Smaller gangs will fight for territory. People will die, maybe hundreds of people. Ji-hoon's expression was anguished. How do I choose between maintaining a corrupt system I hate and creating chaos that kills innocents? Zara stood, walked to the desk, and looked at the files with fresh eyes. Not as evidence of criminality, but as a problem to be solved. You said your money laundering clients are reducing naturally as contracts expire. What's your timeline for complete elimination? 18 months at current rate. Speed it up. Offer incentives to move legitimate. Financial consulting. Real logistics services. Partnership opportunities that make going clean more profitable than staying dirty. Zara pulled up a chair, started taking notes. You're good at business. Make legitimate operations so attractive that criminal clients choose to reform. Ji-hoon watched her work, something like wonder in his expression. And the protection rackets? Those are trickier, because they're based on fear, not profit. You need to eliminate the fear while preventing the vacuum. Zara tapped her pen against her lips, thinking. What if you transition from protection racket to actual community security program? Real services. Transparent pricing. Funded partially by Phoenix Global. As corporate social responsibility. Make it so valuable that when you eventually hand it over to community control, they want to keep it. That still requires maintaining the infrastructure in the short term. Yes, but with transparency and accountability. You document everything. Every business, every payment, every service provided. You build in oversight from community leaders. You create a path to legitimacy that protects people while dismantling the extortion. Zara met his eyes. I'm good at finding patterns in corrupt systems, Ji-hoon. Let me help you dismantle them properly, instead of watching you tear yourself apart trying to do it alone. Ji-hoon sat down heavily. You're offering to help me legitimize criminal operations. Do you understand what that means? You'd be complicit. If this goes wrong, you go to prison too. I understand. But I also understand that you're trying to do something genuinely difficult. Transform an empire built on suffering into something that actually helps people. That's worth the risk. Why? Why would you risk everything for this? Zara thought about the 43 businesses paying protection money, the families too afraid to report abuse, the systems that protected predators while punishing victims. Because Marcus Chen wasn't an isolated monster. He was the product of a system your father built to enable monsters. And you're trying to dismantle that system, while everyone around you says it's impossible. She reached across the desk, took his hand. I spent 8 months trapped by someone who convinced me I was worthless. You spent 3 years trapped by your father's legacy, convinced you had to reform it alone. Maybe we're both done being trapped. Ji-hoon's fingers tightened around hers. This could destroy your career, your reputation, everything you've built. Or it could be the most important work either of us ever does. Zara pulled the financial documents closer. Show me everything. The real books, the shell companies, the protection routes. Let me analyze it the way I analyzed your shipping division. I'll find the patterns, the vulnerabilities, the paths to legitimacy you haven't seen, because you're too close to it. You're serious. Completely. You said you've been in love with me since I called corruption mathematically illiterate fantasy. Well, I'm good at destroying corrupt systems with evidence and analysis. Let me do what I do best, but this time for something that actually matters. Ji-hoon looked at her like she was a miracle he didn't deserve. If we do this, there's no going back. You become part of the reformation, part of the risk, part of everything I'm trying to build. Good, because I'm tired of being protected. I want to be a partner. Zara smiled. Besides, you said it yourself. You're terrified of creating a power vacuum. Maybe the solution isn't you holding power alone. Maybe it's us building something together that's stronger than any one person's control. Ji-hoon stood, circled the desk, and pulled her into his arms. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her hair. Probably not, but you're getting me anyway. Zara leaned back to look at him. Now show me the real books. All of them. We have 18 months to transform a criminal empire into a legitimate business, and I don't waste time. Ji-hoon laughed, the first genuine, unguarded laugh she'd heard from him, and kissed her. And in that moment, Zara Thompson stopped being a victim who needed saving, and became a partner in dismantling the systems that created victims in the first place. Chapter 7. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. in Phoenix Global's main auditorium. 200 people filled the space. Employees, journalists, investors, and representatives from Seattle's business community. Zara stood backstage with Ji-hoon, adjusting the collar of the tailored suit he'd insisted on buying her. You don't have to do this, Ji-hoon said quietly. I can announce everything myself. You don't need to be publicly associated with reforming a corrupt system, Zara interrupted. With holding abusers accountable? With building something better? She met his eyes. I'm not hiding anymore, Ji-hoon. Not from Marcus. Not from the board. Not from anyone who thinks victims should stay silent. It had been 8 weeks since her collapse. 8 weeks of healing, revelation, and the hardest decision of her life. To stay with the man who'd saved her, and help him dismantle the empire that had enabled her suffering. The investigation into Phoenix Global's HR failures had uncovered worse than either of them had imagined. 73 complaints over 15 years. 43 women who'd left the company after reporting abuse. 8 settlements with NDAs that essentially paid women to disappear. And a paper trail showing systematic protection of connected men that went all the way back to Ji-hoon's father. But they'd also built something new. Over 6 weeks of 18-hour days, Zara had designed a comprehensive ethics program that addressed every failure she'd identified. Ji-hoon had approved every recommendation without question, allocated unlimited budget, and created a new C-suite position specifically for her, Chief Ethics Officer. The announcement was going out today. 5 minutes. A stage manager called. Ji-hoon turned to face Zara fully. Last chance to change your mind. Once we're out there, you're publicly aligned with me. With everything I am, everything I'm trying to become. Good. Zara straightened his tie. I want to be aligned with the man who's brave enough to admit his company was broken, and committed enough to fix it properly. That's worth being associated with. They walked onto the stage together. Cameras flashed. Conversations died. 200 people watched the ice dragon of the Pacific Northwest take the podium with the woman everyone had seen him carry from a meeting 2 months ago. Thank you for coming, Ji-hoon began, his voice carrying the authority that made grown men nervous. I'm here today to announce significant changes to Phoenix Global Holdings' corporate structure and policies. Changes that should have been made years ago. Changes that became necessary because this company failed to protect its employees from systematic abuse. The room went deadly silent. 2 months ago, one of our senior analysts collapsed during a presentation. What most of you don't know is that she collapsed because she'd been hiding injuries from a violent assault committed by another Phoenix Global employee. An assault that occurred after she filed an HR complaint that was dismissed by managers more interested in protecting connected predators than supporting victims. Zara watched journalists frantically taking notes. Several board members looked uncomfortable. The employee who assaulted her has been criminally prosecuted and is currently serving time for assault and embezzlement. The HR manager who dismissed the complaint has been terminated. But those individual consequences aren't enough. Because what happened wasn't an isolated failure. It was the inevitable result of a corporate culture that my father built and I allowed to continue. Ji-hoon's honesty was brutal and calculated. He was burning his father's legacy publicly, ensuring no one could claim ignorance going forward. Today I'm announcing a complete restructuring of Phoenix Global's approach to workplace safety and ethics. First, we're implementing anonymous reporting with external investigation. All harassment and abuse complaints will be handled by a third-party firm with no financial ties to Phoenix Global or its board members. He clicked to the next slide, showing the program Zara had designed. Second, we're establishing a survivor support fund, providing legal representation, medical care, and financial assistance to any employee who reports abuse, regardless of the investigation outcome. No one will be forced to choose between their safety and their livelihood. More camera flashes. One investor stood to leave, and Ji-hoon's gaze tracked him coldly. Third, we're implementing zero tolerance for connected predators. I don't care if your uncle sits on our board. I don't care if your family donated to my father's campaigns. I don't care about your pedigree or your connections. If you hurt someone at this company, you will face criminal prosecution, civil liability, and permanent termination. No settlements, no NDAs, no quiet resignations. The room erupted in whispers. And finally, Ji-hoon continued, his voice cutting through the noise. I'm announcing the creation of a new C-suite position, Chief Ethics Officer. This role will have authority equal to any executive, independent budget, and direct reporting to the board. The officer will conduct regular audits, investigate systemic failures, and ensure Phoenix Global never again enables the kind of abuse that was allowed under previous leadership. He turned, extending his hand toward Zara. I'm honored to announce that Zara Thompson has accepted this position. Many of you know her as the brilliant analyst who identified the shipping division corruption last year. Some of you saw her collapse 2 months ago. Today, you're meeting the woman who designed every aspect of this ethics program, and who will ensure these aren't just pretty policies, but actual transformation. Zara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Thank you, Ji-hoon. I'm accepting this role because I believe Phoenix Global can become what it should have been all along, a company that protects employees instead of protecting predators. A place where reporting abuse doesn't end your career, but starts accountability. Where being connected means nothing if you're committing crimes. She clicked to the detailed program overview. The ethics system we're implementing has 5 core components. Anonymous reporting through an external firm that's already been contracted and trained. Survivor support, including legal representation from a dedicated team of attorneys, specializing in workplace abuse cases. Mandatory training conducted by actual survivors, not corporate lawyers reading scripts designed to limit liability. Regular independent audits of all HR decisions, settlements, and terminations. And public transparency. We'll publish annual reports showing complaint numbers, investigation outcomes, and systemic changes implemented. Hands shot up from journalists. Zara pointed to one. Miss Thompson, isn't this position a conflict of interest? You were a victim of the very system you're now in charge of reforming? That's exactly why I'm qualified, Zara responded. I know how these systems fail, because I've lived through that failure. I know what victims need, because I've needed it. And I know what accountability looks like, because I watched it finally happen to the man who hurt me. This isn't conflict of interest. It's expertise you can't get from someone who's never experienced the harm. Another journalist. Mr. Kang, critics might say this is just PR damage control. How do we know these changes are genuine? Ji-hoon's expression was hard. Because we're going further than PR would require. We're reaching out to every woman who left Phoenix Global after filing a complaint in the last 15 years. We're offering reinstatement at higher positions, back pay for lost wages, and the opportunity to participate in an independent investigation into what happened to them. We're essentially inviting our own failures to be publicly examined. That could cost hundreds of millions in settlements, someone called out. Yes, and it's worth every dollar to ensure we never create another victim. Ji-hoon's voice was absolute. My father built an empire on protecting powerful men who hurt vulnerable women. I'm dismantling that empire brick by brick, even if it costs me allies, profits, and power. Because the alternative is continuing to enable abuse, and that's not an option I can live with. Zara watched the room absorb this. The brutal honesty, the financial commitment, the public acknowledgement of systemic failure. Some people looked skeptical. Others looked hopeful. A few board members looked furious. Good. If they weren't uncomfortable, the reforms weren't deep enough. After the press conference, in Ji-hoon's office, they watched the coverage roll in. Most headlines focused on the dramatic announcement. A few were already calling it performative. One financial analyst predicted Phoenix Global's stock would drop 15%. 12%, Zara corrected, studying the trading data. And it'll recover within 6 months, once investors realize we're eliminating legal liability and attracting better talent. Ji-hoon looked at her with something that might have been love, or might have been awe, or might have been both. You're sure about this? About tying your career to mine? About being chief ethics officer of a company that's publicly admitting it enabled abuse? Zara turned from the window where Seattle sprawled beneath them, a city that had watched her fall and now would watch her rise. I spent 8 months being controlled by someone who convinced me I was worthless. I'm not spending the rest of my life hiding from my own power. She moved to where Ji-hoon stood, took his hands. We're doing this together. Equal partners. You bring the authority and resources. I bring the expertise and vision. And together we build something that actually protects people, instead of just protecting power. Equal partners, Ji-hoon repeated, like a vow. Equal partners, Zara confirmed. And in that moment, she stopped being the woman who'd collapsed, bruised in a meeting, and became the woman who would ensure no one else had to collapse before being heard. Chapter 8. 6 months after the press conference, Zara stood in what was now their shared office, a space that had been completely redesigned to accommodate 2 executives working as equals, rather than one CEO holding court. Her desk faced Ji-hoon's across a collaborative workspace, filled with whiteboards, covered in financial projections, ethics program metrics, and reformation timelines. The Seattle skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows as evening settled over the city. Zara was reviewing the quarterly ethics report when Ji-hoon walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and the expression he wore whenever he had news. 3 convictions came through today, he said, setting her coffee down. Harris, Chen, and Morrison. The trifecta. Zara looked up sharply. All 3? On the same day. Apparently the prosecutors coordinated timing for maximum impact. Ji-hoon sat at his desk, pulling up the court documents on his screen. James Harris, former VP of Operations. 5 years for systematic harassment and retaliation against subordinates. Thomas Chen, former senior trader and Marcus's cousin. 7 years for assault and embezzlement. And David Morrison, the finance director who helped cover up 17 complaints. 3 years for obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. Marcus? Zara asked, though she knew the answer. 15 years. Assault, battery, embezzlement, theft of intellectual property, and witness tampering for threatening you after his arrest. Ji-hoon's expression was grim satisfaction. He'll serve at least 10 with good behavior. More if he doesn't learn to keep his head down in prison. Zara felt the familiar mixture of emotions that came with Marcus's name. Anger, relief, lingering trauma, and a fierce satisfaction that justice had finally caught someone who'd believed he was untouchable. How many is that total? She asked. Ji-hoon pulled up the spreadsheet they'd been maintaining. Including today's convictions, we've had criminal prosecutions against 11 former employees for harassment, abuse, or enabling. Civil settlements with 47 former employees who were driven out after reporting complaints. Reinstatement offers to 33 women, of which 19 have returned to Phoenix Global in promoted positions. And 0, he emphasized the word, new complaints dismissed without proper investigation. The Survivor Support Program? Assisted 62 employees in the last 6 months. 23 are pursuing legal action with our funded attorneys. 31 received medical care and counseling. 8 received emergency financial assistance. And we've had 3 cases where the external investigation cleared the accused, which proves the system works both ways. Zara nodded, making notes. The ethics program she'd designed wasn't just about punishing abusers. It was about creating genuine accountability that protected everyone involved. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. The board meeting is in an hour. Are you ready for the presentation? Are you? Ji-hoon countered. Tonight's board meeting would determine whether the reformation continued, or whether powerful interests would push back hard enough to reverse course. 6 months of transformation had made Phoenix Global the subject of intense scrutiny, praised by some as a model for corporate ethics reform, condemned by others as performative overreach that was destroying shareholder value. The stock had indeed dropped 12% initially, exactly as Zara had predicted, but it had recovered 8 points as talent flooded in from competitors, brilliant analysts and executives who wanted to work somewhere that took ethics seriously. Revenue was actually up 7% year over year, as legitimate operations expanded to fill the space left by criminal activities. But that expansion had come at a cost. The cost of power. I need to ask you something, Zara said, setting down her coffee. And I need the radical honesty answer, not the diplomatic one. Always. Do you regret it? Not the ethics program or the prosecutions. I mean the criminal operations you've dismantled, the power your father built, that you've systematically destroyed, the connections you've burned, the allies you've lost, the empire you've reduced. Ji-hoon was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Seattle skyline that he'd once controlled through fear, and now influenced through increasingly legitimate means. The money laundering is completely eliminated, as of last month, he said finally. The last shell company dissolved. The last criminal client transitioned to legitimate services, or moved to competitors. That cost me $18 million in annual revenue, and several Korean families who'd been working with my father for 20 years now view me as a traitor. He stood, moved to the window. The protection rackets are down to 7 businesses, all transitioning to actual community security programs with transparent funding and oversight from neighborhood councils. That cost me respect from old guard associates who think I've gone soft and made Seattle vulnerable to the Bratva's expansion attempts. Have we become vulnerable? Zara asked. We've become different. The Bratva tried to move into Chinatown 3 months ago. The community didn't call me for protection. They called the police and the new community security program we'd established. Legitimate response to legitimate threat. The Bratva backed off because they realized these neighborhoods weren't abandoned territory, just differently protected. Ji-hoon turned to face her. So I lost the power to threaten people into compliance. But the communities are actually safer, and nobody's paying for protection they can't afford. That doesn't answer my question. Do you regret losing that power? Ji-hoon crossed to where she sat, pulled her up to stand with him at the window overlooking the city. I regret that it took your suffering to make me choose reformation over comfort. I regret that you had to collapse bruised in front of 40 people before I stopped being a coward about dismantling my father's legacy. I regret every day I maintained plausible deniability about the harm my empire was causing, because I was too afraid to lose control. His arms circled her waist, careful and respectful even 6 months into their relationship, always asking permission through gesture, always giving her space to say no. But I will never regret catching you when you fell, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. And I will never regret the woman you chose to become after. The woman who looked at my criminal operations and said, let me help you dismantle them properly. The woman who designed an ethics program that's becoming an industry standard. The woman who stands beside me as an equal partner, instead of a protected victim. Zara leaned back against his chest, watching Seattle's lights flicker to life as darkness settled over the city. Your father built an empire on fear, she said quietly. You're building something on trust instead. That's harder, that's slower, but it's better. Do you regret choosing to stay? Ji-hoon asked. Choosing to tie your career to mine? Becoming the face of reformation at a company that was publicly exposed for enabling abuse? Zara thought about the last 6 months, the exhausting work of building new systems, the hostile board members who fought every reform, the journalists who questioned her motives, the former colleagues who saw her promotion as sleeping her way to the top, rather than earning it through expertise. She also thought about the 19 women who'd returned to Phoenix Global in promoted positions, the 62 survivors who'd received support they would never have gotten under the old system, the 11 abusers now in prison who would have continued hurting people if the system hadn't changed. I regret nothing, she said firmly. This is the most important work I've ever done. We're not just changing one company, we're proving that reformation is possible. That you can dismantle corrupt systems and build something better. That powerful men can choose to give up the power that harms people, even when it costs them everything. Especially then, because that's when the choice means something. Zara turned in his arms to face him. You didn't just catch me when I fell, Ji-hoon. You let me help you fall too. Fall away from your father's empire, from the power that was destroying you, from the man you were terrified of becoming. We fell together, and we built something better from the wreckage. Ji-hoon kissed her then, gentle, reverent, the way he always kissed her, like she was precious and powerful and worth every sacrifice he'd made. When they finally broke apart, Zara glanced at her watch. Board meeting in 45 minutes. They're going to push back on the Q4 ethics budget. Are you ready? Are we ready? Ji-hoon corrected. Equal partners, remember? Equal partners, Zara agreed. They gathered their presentation materials, straightened their suits, and prepared to face a room full of powerful people who wanted the old Phoenix Global back. The one that protected profits over people, that enabled abusers in the name of stability, that measured success by power accumulated rather than harm prevented. But Zara Thompson and Kang Ji-hoon weren't the people who'd run that company anymore. They were partners in reformation, equals in transformation. Two people who'd chosen each other and chosen change, even when it cost them everything. And as they walked toward the boardroom together, Zara realized that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is fall. Fall away from who you're supposed to be, fall toward who you could become, and fall in love with someone brave enough to fall with you. The ice dragon of the Pacific Northwest, and the woman he'd caught mid-collapse, rebuilding an empire on trust instead of fear. Together.